Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Chuck Prophet and Stevie Simkin discussing What Makes the Monkey Dance, the life and music of Chuck Prophet and Green on Red, in conversation tonight with Daniel Strickland. We are so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this uncertain time. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter. This evening's virtual event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, please click the like button, and we will try to get to as many questions as time will allow. Also, please consider supporting our bookstore, Book Soup, and Chuck Prophet and Stevie Simkin by purchasing a copy of today's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. You have a chance to purchase Chuck Prophet's new album on vinyl or CD in a special discounted bundle with the book, and that's good tonight. We are selling digital audiobooks as well. For now, a few words about our featured guests. Our moderator, Daniel Strickland, is a senior event manager for Noise Pop, works for Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, and represents several artists in the San Francisco music scene. Stevie Simkin is reader in drama and film at the University of Winchester, England. He is the author of 8 books and numerous articles and book chapters about theater, cinema, and popular music. He is Chuck Prophet's official archivist and is currently assisting with the reissue program set to begin in 2021. Chuck Prophet started out as a post-punk California kid who helped kickstart the alt-country genre when he joined Dan Stewart's Green on Red, then making a name for themselves as part of the so-called Paisley Underground alongside bands like the Dream Syndicate and the Bangles. While Green on Red established a reputation for self-destruction, illuminated by flashes of brilliance in the studio and on festival stages around Europe in the late 1980s, Prophet simultaneously immersed himself in roots music and forged a solo career via backroom and basement venues across his adopted home of San Francisco. He has emerged as one of the most respected musicians of his generation, admired for his talents as a songwriter, guitarist, vocalist, and live performer. He has worked with the likes of Tony Visconti and Warren Zevon, and his songs have been performed by artists as diverse as Bruce Springsteen and Solomon Burke. His new album is The Land That Time Forgot. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to our moderator, Daniel Strickland. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Dan, for the introductions. Thank you, Book Soup, for having us, and thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy pandemic schedule to join Stevie and Chuck. Guys, I want to start with a question, sort of a general question. Both the book and the record came out last Friday after many things that seemed to get in the way of that. Stevie, how does it feel?
Yeah, it's been a long journey. So it's fantastic to have it out there and starting to get some feedback. So I could, people were receiving it, and some people got the special edition, and it's beautifully designed, packaged by Jawbone Press. So I was getting quite a lot of feedback on how good it looked, and there was a little kind of, maybe a day or two goes by and you think, is anybody reading it? Anybody going to say anything about, what I've written? And I'm starting to get that feedback now. I had some nice reviews and some good feedback from friends and fans of Chuck's. So starting to, it's kind of a little bit nervous, now it's out there just to see how people are going to respond to it. But so far so good. And I'm looking forward to more feedback when people dig into it. It's a big book. It's a lot to get through. So, yeah.
Well, we're going to dive into the book during this chat. But Chuck, how does it feel to have both a book about you and the album out?
Not as great as you might think. I mean, I'm good at the process. I like songwriting. I like sitting down and talking about music, which Stevie and I did a lot. And I like, I think I like making records. I'm always a little bit happier once it's done. But the part about when it comes out and like promoting and social media, and I think it's all sort of designed to make you feel like you're doing it wrong. So, I mean, although I'm enjoying that people are reacting to it, I'm still kind of out of my depth here, trying to see the world through a computer screen. I'd rather be out just doing the hand-to-hand combat from town to town. So it's a little weird. I'm trying to get comfortable with it.
Well, I mean, and as a writer, having a book written about you, did it ever occur to you that you might want to write an autobiography?
I think I'd like to do a book of essays someday, or snapshots, or what Bob Dylan called chronicles. But I think what Stevie did was pretty unique in that he wrote a book that's not only a kind of biography, but it of course goes from record to record and kind of burrows down into the songs. But he also kind of created an owner's manual for how to be or how not to be a sort of under the radar artist. And I look and I kind of stand back and squint and I go, I guess in spite of everything, there's a lot of gigs in there and a lot of records and a lot of miles. And somehow I did that without ever really even being in the music business on some level. So I think that's kind of an extra bonus for the book. I think it could be interesting to people, even if they're not particularly Chuck Prophet fans, because it's an honest portrayal of what it's like, what it's like for an independent artist to get his work out, get his songs out there, and get from town to town. And what goes on behind all that stuff is also kind of interesting.
Stevie, did you?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the book, when you became a Chuck fan, when the idea for the book came about, and then how that went?
Yeah, it's. I talk about the book being a long journey because I've written over 4 years, but my relationship with Chuck's music goes back to the late '80s when I discovered Green on Red, and I discovered Green on Red actually by reading reviews of their live shows and albums in the music press at the time. So, this is pre-internet, of course, and this is the days of the NME, Sounds, Melody Maker, that were weekly music newspapers in the UK, and they were kind of that really shaped my musical taste when I was in, I guess, my late teens, early 20s. And I came across this review, and I think it was an interview maybe with Dan and Chuck, and then a review of the album Here Come the Snakes. And that's where it started with me. And I didn't know at that point that Chuck was around that time starting a solo career as well. And I came across Brother Aldo in the racks in my local record store. So great discovery. And then I was ready for the next solo album in '92. And it was one of those things where, a new album comes out, this pilgrimage to the record store, 9 a.m. on a Monday, as it is in the UK, or as it was in the UK back then. And I was ready to buy Balinese Dancer. And that was the one I think that really got its claws into me. And I saw Chuck play in Edinburgh the following year on his first solo European tour. And I've got really vivid memories of that gig. And I did a review of one of Chuck's shows in '97 when he was touring behind Homemade Blood. And I sent it to Henning, who was running Chuck's website, kind of early genesis of the website. And Henning liked it, and he put it up online, and then Chuck emailed me a couple of days later and thanked me for it. And that was just the start then of our correspondence. And sometimes we'd have emails back and forth, and I wouldn't hear from him for a few months. And so there's another album coming down the pike, and we just started to chat after shows, hang out after shows, have dinner before a show, and we became friends over a period of years. And I think it was probably, I'm thinking about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I first suggested to Chuck maybe it might be a good idea to there was an interesting story here to tell of his career. But Chuck, I would be right in saying you weren't all that keen first of all when I first suggested it.
Well, I wasn't that keen on it. I felt like it's kind of like the dreaded box set. You know, I feel like any artist that has a box set, it's like Duke Ellington or something. You know, it's something that people get at Christmas to feel good about themselves, and they might listen to it once and then put it up on the shelf, and that's where it stays. And I just feel like I'm not ready to be boxed up. I feel like I'm just getting the hang of what I'm doing now, you know. And also, I've read so many of these books, and like, when did they ever get anything right? You know, I mean, my favorite book growing up was an Edie Sedgwick biography that my older sister Francine had around the house, and I remember reading that like when I was 12. And everybody in the book contradicts each other, and you know, I was quite prepared for that. And there's a little bit of that in the book. People say things. I don't remember it going that way, but hey, I let people have their say. And I told Stevie early on, you know, you're probably going to have to betray me, and it's possible that, you know, when we're done with this, we won't be friends. But lo and behold, you know, we're still friends, and I think it could be an interesting, you know, document for people.
What was the first betrayal, Chuck?
Well, you know, if you read like the Steve Jobs biography, or if you read the Neil Young biography, or if you read the biography on several presidents, you know, they usually start out pretty good, and then towards the end, you know, the guy that wrote the Steve Jobs one says, well, I don't think he's a very good father, you know, like they just start to kind of, you know. And the Neil Young one, I think by the end, the guy couldn't hardly contain his contempt for Neil, because Neil's a tough customer, man. Everybody, I mean, you know, anybody that's gone to a Neil Young show and watched him, you know, make his guitar feedback for 45 minutes, they have to know, you know, he doesn't care that much about them. You know, so it's a difficult thing, you know. But Stevie is he'd written a bunch of other books. I read a couple of them. Stevie's a professor of film at a university, and I find that to be very interesting. His book on femme fatales is fascinating. So I liked Stevie, and I never, I always enjoyed sitting down and talking. And, you know, once we got past the records and the gigs and got into some of the tangents, I really thought, you know, we had we were good company. So I enjoyed all of it. And there was a fair amount of sitting down.
Yeah, we
Stevie.
had 4 visits. Yeah, go on, Daniel.
No, go ahead and speak to that.
It was 4 visits over the years, and each time it was about 5 days at each visit. And Chuck, as much as he could, would clear his diary for me each time. So we would sit really all day. We'd have a long lunch in the middle of the day, but we would sit and talk. And the recorders would be recording, and then I'd come back. Somebody would transcribe all these hours of interview, and then I'd have to work my way through it. And that was a challenge. So it's been an interesting process of, you know, every trip to San Francisco for me was a real treat. It was work, but it was great fun. And as Chuck says, a lot of the conversations, you know, a lot of that stuff would never have made it into the book. But I think it was an important part of the process of us just chatting and Chuck getting comfortable maybe, and that's, you know, when some of the secrets come out and some of the and I think the other thing that occurred to me actually when Chuck was talking about Steve Jobs and Neil Young, I think I was lucky that I got to know Chuck after he'd mellowed out a little bit. So I think if Chuck and I met maybe in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe it would have been different. But I think, you know, Chuck went through a lot of changes in his life probably in the late 90s, and that's about the time we got to know each other, and that's probably was a good thing. Would you agree, Chuck? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, that's my wife would say the same thing. I think one of the things, you know, I think one of the things that the book does, and I hope, is that I talk a lot about the records and how you know, where I was frustrated and where I kind of thought I missed the mark, and songs that maybe came out less than definitive. And, you know, I don't want that to come come off as a bunch of poor mouthing, because I don't want it to really take away from people's enjoyment of those records. There's a Woody Allen book where he talks about each film, chronologically, and he says that Hannah and Her Sisters was a mess and Bullets Over Broadway, and I could almost couldn't read it, because we were so far. My experience was so far off what his experience. Everything is colored by my experience of doing it. So some of these records were difficult births, but I don't want it to take away from people's enjoyment the way, the experience colors it for me. So that's something I learned later, And, I didn't always agree with what Stevie said, but he let me have my say. And if he agreed, he might... He let me have my day in court, but it's not my book, And there's a lot of stuff in there that's not flattering, so I don't want my haters to get bummed out, because there's some good stuff in there, for them too.
And I would add that, I was really lucky to, and haven't been able to say this in previous chats we've had like this, that a lot of people gave up time to talk to me. And one of the things that I found early on when I was just putting out feelers, contacting people, saying I was writing this book, every time they would get straight back to me and say, what can I do to help? I'd love to talk to you. It's about time somebody wrote a book about Chuck. And, everybody from Kelly Willis, Eric Westfall, Paul Caldery, had long conversation with Dan Stuart. Dan was brilliant. Dan read early drafts of chapters about Green on Red. Chris Kakavas, Steffi, long conversation with Steffi, Kevin T. White, James DePrato. So there's a lot of voices in the book, which I think is one of its strengths as well. And I've been really lucky that people have been so generous with their time. And, particularly Steffi, talked very honestly and openly about the difficult times as well as the good times. And so it really tells a story that has been gathered from different sources, and that's a challenge as well, that to make it knit together. But it was great fun to make that happen, and hopefully that comes across.
I want to talk a little bit about what was the process like, Stevie? You talked about you had 4 visits in researching the book.
Yeah.
How are Chuck's memories going back to the Green on Red days? How vivid are they?
Yeah, maybe Green on Red was a bit fuzzier at times. I think Chuck can have his say here, but there were certainly moments, really interesting moments and times in the studio that Chuck talked about in great detail and with great clarity, and then other things might have been a little bit fuzzier. I think when we got into talk about the Albion days, so Chuck's early solo career, when he sort of stepped back from Green on Red and started to rebuild a different kind of approach to the music, some really vivid memories there, and I found that really fascinating. There's quite a lot in the book about that. So yeah, I was surprised and delighted that Chuck had so many vivid memories of those early days. Chuck, what's your perspective on that?
Well, there's complete tours from Green on Red. I don't really remember much of anything, but then again, I can remember vividly a movie that I saw on the BBC, in 1988. I think Danny and I were pretty generous with each other. I think one of the added bonuses that I didn't see coming was that Green on Red were really a product of the weeklies. For those who don't know, in England, there were 3 weeklies at one time, weekly music magazines, or papers rather, Melody Maker, Sounds, and the NME. And we just gave them great copy, we were always up for it. And so there were a lot of young writers who were really trying to make a name for themselves and just cartwheeling over the page, like getting all their Hunter S. Thompson fantasies out. And so some of those quotes that Stevie was able to dig up, because it's on record, they're just over the top and really a lot of fun for me. That was the golden age of music journalism for me, and it was great to be a part of it. I mean, just to sort of be a part of it.
Yeah, just to add to that, the other part of the visits, or at least a couple of them, the later visits, has been working through a lot of Chuck's paper archives. So hundreds and hundreds of photos, press cuttings. Chuck gave me it was literally a suitcase full of green on red and early press cuttings. And that was a challenge. So just in the first case, digitizing that, and then working with all those sources, and again working in Chuck's memories and Dan's, and then all those press reviews that Chuck mentioned, both of the live shows, and it's amazing, even the same show reviewed by two different reviewers, and the Melody Maker and Sounds maybe completely different perspectives on what they were seeing on stage. So again, I mean, that's interesting challenge to work with that and try and make sense of it somehow. But yeah, so that was.
Go ahead, Chuck. I was going to ask you a question. Go ahead.
I mean, in those days, we were definitely inventing ourselves as we went along, and I think Stevie came across in that suitcase a letter from Green on Red's manager in the UK that was, looked like a typewriter, looked like a ransom note. And it was very heated, and it was very specific about, money and the time, and a very pointed, heated letter. And I just thought it was, hilarious. It was like, I don't know, something out of like it was just like a war correspondence or something. I just don't remember anything big of a deal.
It was what we would call these days passive aggressive, I think, in its tone. It was kind of, I'm doing all this stuff for you, and and you're getting a weekly salary, and when are you going to get a producer for your album and get it together? Yeah, it's interesting document.
But that's the way Stevie, it was, because communicated.
Sorry, guys, I don't mean to be stepping on your toes there. Stevie, I'm curious how going into this book, how your idea of how you're going to tell the story changed from the time you started researching and writing and sort of when you got into it.
Yeah. I mean, it's been said I've got this academic background, so I guess there was always an ambition, or I don't know, not even that, it's just kind of an automatic way that I would work, would be to somehow try and get the context for this particular story. So it's not just Chuck went here, Chuck went there, Chuck did that and made this record. That I was really keen to try and understand the changes in the music industry. If we think about the changes in the music industry over the time Chuck's been working, with the rise of the CD and then collapse of the CD, the rise of the MP3, streaming, vinyl revival, and we're just talking there about the medium in which the music is contained. All the massive changes in the industry, major record labels rising and falling, and Chuck has had to kind of somehow carve out a route through that, and I think there's endless biographies of people working at the level of Springsteen or Tom Petty or Neil Young, but I think actually trying to understand what it's like, as Chuck describes himself, under the radar, in some ways working outside the music industry as we would recognize it. What that story for me is fascinating. So it's not just Chuck's career and all the music, but actually the context in which he's had to work. And sometimes when we talked about that, Chuck's kind of said, well, I make the music, I go on the road, but I know also there's everything else that has to be done, dealing with the label, producers, publicists, working with tour managers and venues, and without getting into too much of the nitty gritty, I'm hoping that people get a clearer idea maybe what it's like, that his working life has been like, because that was new to me. I think that's something I discovered over our conversations, and I probably had a slightly romanticized idea what it is to be a rock star. It's kind of, and there is electrifying moments on stage. There are those incredible moments in the studio when you're creating this great music, but there's a lot of, I was about to say hard graft, but I know that means something different in the States. Really, really hard work just to keep it together and make it work. And people like Dan Kennedy, who's been alongside Chuck for so many years, what a major part they played in just keeping the show on the road. So I'm hoping that is interesting for people to read as well.
I mean, Chuck, do you think this would make you, if you read this biography today, would it make you more or less likely to do what you've done in the last 30 years?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
that's a good question.
The biography does shine a light on a lot of the nuts and bolts, but the ephemeral part, what a kind of a buzz it is just to get 2 lines in a song to do what you want them to do. And the lines are out there. It might take you a week, it might take you a year, but the buzz that you get from writing a song you're proud of, or the buzz of a great gig or something, like, it's hard for me to really describe that. That would be like me describing, sex to somebody. So I think people might read the book and think, oh, this is kind of exhausting, but I don't know how much of just the good times and just the joy that I've had playing and traveling and meeting people, and I mean, I just never got into music to do this by myself, and I really am a believer in the shared experience. So me and Steffi and we have a lot of great memories too. Aside from trucks that went off the road in the snow and in the middle of the night or whatever, and Scandinavia. I mean, there's a lot of good times. I hope that comes across.
Do you think that comes across, Stevie, in the way the final product turned out?
And partly, yeah. I mean, it's interesting to hear Chuck saying that, because Chuck was very hands off with the whole process in terms of me actually doing the writing until the very end, towards the very end, when he asked to see it. At just the right moment, in fact, because I had to lose about 40,000 words. The publisher insisted that I had to cut down. I had about 140, I had to get it down to 100. And so Chuck came in with his editing skills at just the right moment. But one of the other things that came up quite often as he was sort of going through things was I think he got the impression that there were too many downers. So actually reminding me that they had a lot of fun, and actually, so it was hard work. That first European tour was low to the ground in lots of ways, but actually being on those stages and connecting with the audiences was such a joyful experience as well. And I talk a bit about, by referencing bootlegs and my own memories of gigs, that I try and capture maybe something of that as well, the magic that was happening on the stage. But yeah, it was good to be reminded that Chuck wasn't, he was, because he loved it, so I think balancing that out has been important, definitely.
I think we lost Stevie on video, but he'll come back. Chuck, I think Stevie mentioned that the first time he saw you was in Edinburgh, correct? I think he mentioned that.
Yeah.
What are some places that you, when you think about being back on the road, in the US and the UK, other places that you can't wait to get back to, either cities or venues, and I know they're all great, but what are some places that come to mind for you?
I do miss the long drives, and maybe with some coffee and just kind of the road moving under us. I miss places like St. Paul and Minneapolis and Austin, Texas, and Tampa, Florida, Kansas City, Milwaukee, our friends in Madison, Wisconsin. It just goes on and on, really. And then overseas, like, I don't think there's any better audiences than there are in the UK. It's just it's ingrained into their culture. Going clubbing or going to the gig, and they get their pint of beer and they belly up to the front of the stage, and they're ready, man. They're standing on a sticky black floor and like, oh, fuck yeah, and there's just nothing like it. The audiences in England are so great. They're so, they're so in tune with what's going on, and I miss all that. I really do. And the thing is that when I make these records, as much as I like being in the studio, I'm happy when they're done, when I fight them to the ground to wrestle them all the way, and they get them to behave. We get them mastered, we get the artwork, and then we got to work up all this propaganda every time with the press release. And what's the record about, Chuck? And well, it's about a lot of things. It's songs, and well, what's the story? And once that gets done and we get in the van and we're playing every night, I just love it. I love all of it.
Hey, you mentioned the new record. Stevie, I want to ask you, what is the new record about?
Oh, goodness. Okay, that's a challenge. Well, I think there are two really strong themes. One is political, and one is it's a very romantic record. So Chuck would talk more eloquently than me about it, but we have those songs about different presidents, Nixon, Lincoln, and Donald Trump, but there are also some very beautiful ballads and love songs, particularly on the second half of the album. Thinking of those songs, Womankind and Meet Me at the Roundabout and Waving Goodbye. So it's a really tender album, but then there are those songs like Nixonland and Get Off the Stage, which contrast very strongly. So those are the two things I hear going on anyway, thematically.
If you were to tell somebody who didn't know Chuck's material, what would be the record? I think you mentioned Balinese Dancer was maybe the first one.
Is this where
That's about the time you wrote the review.
Stevie?
Yeah, this is where you got to mute me.
Is this where I mute Stevie? I don't want to get into a big disagreement with him in front of all these nice people.
Yeah, so mute yourself, Chuck, and Stevie will just answer.
Well, I would say two things. First of all, if somebody had never heard Chuck's music and they said, give me one song, I'm going to give you two. So I would say Marathon. I think there's so much in that song that expresses where Chuck is now. And it's such a fantastic song. Steffi sings so beautifully on it. It's lovely having Chuck and Steffi's voices equaled out on that song. So there's loads in that song. But I would say probably, and this is where Chuck may mute me, I would say if you play the last 90 seconds of Heartbreaks Like the Dawn of Balinese Dancer, for me, that is, it makes me want to laugh, cry, feel like I can leap over tall buildings in a single bound. When I hear that 90 seconds, anytime, wherever I am, whenever I hear it, that is what gets me completely, utterly. So listen to, if you can track it down, because it's not on streaming sites, listen to the last 90 seconds of and the whole song, Heartbreaks Like the Dawn. There we go.
Nice. Chuck, did you see this comment here? I've been monitoring the comments, and we'll get to questions in a few minutes, guys. If you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the ask a question there at the bottom of your screen. Help Me K-Dog says this is your most woke record. I hate that word woke, but I know what he means.
I agree.
Oh,
I agree wholeheartedly.
okay. Stevie, you think?
Yeah, I agree. I feel similarly a little bit conflicted about the word. it's interesting though, because in my day job, I'm teaching 18 to 21-year-olds, and I do think that, when you listen to Waving Goodbye, that's one that really struck me. That I reckon, that's a song that a lot of my students would relate to. Particularly, it's about discovering identity and sexuality and those kinds of things that are so central, I think, to young people these days. And so, I would agree. It's more than just that one song. And clearly there's, that strong political strand on the album as well, which I love. But if we're going to use the word, then I'd agree. It is Chuck's most woke album.
Cool. That song, by the way, always reminds me of She's Leaving Home whenever I hear it.
There's a song on the record called Womankind. And whenever I introduce that song, I generally introduce it by saying that, there was a time when the world was like a giant Bon Jovi song. And if you could lift heavy things down at the docks, that might earn you the right to come home and say, where's dinner? It better be on the table at 6 or else. And, that time has come and gone. That ship has sailed. It's not, it's women's time now. They're better managers. They're better collaborators. Women are more educated. And so if this record is woke, I'm all for it. I mean, let's face it, men had a good run, but it's over.
Are you guys ready to go into some questions?
Sure.
You cool with that? Okay. Question from, I'm going to mispronounce the name. Is it Aljesh?
Aja.
Aja.
It's him, and he's from. It's him, and he's from Slovenia.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Don't mess with Aja.
Well, he says, "Love to you both." And question for Stevie: did you talk to Winston Watson for the book?
Oh no, I didn't, and I should have done. There's more people I'd love to have spoken to, and Winston's one of them. So. I wish I had. Fantastic drummer, lovely guy from everything I've heard. But Chuck, have you got some memories about Winston?
I could give you his number if anybody wants it. You can call him. He'd love to hear. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you.
Just post it there in the chat so everybody can call him tonight.
Yeah. Winston was in the band for three years, I think. Just a lot of fun, really wild, and one of the funnier guys we ever had in the band. And I just saw him in Tucson, and a lot of gigs, a lot of miles.
He had another question about vinyl reissues, and you mentioned, Stevie, that Balinese Dancer is not streaming. Are there plans for that as the archivist?
Yeah, there are plans, and I know that Chris Metzler has been talking to Cooking Vinyl about, particularly about getting Homemade Blood reissued and Hurting Business. With Chuck's permission, I'll just say a little bit about that, and it's somewhere on the horizon, and of course it's Chuck who has to give the green light, but we have done some work, so I think we could do a really nice reissue of Homemade Blood on vinyl as a double album with 4 outtakes that didn't make the cut but should have done, I think. And I actually think that album, above all the others, probably could be reassessed in an expanded form like that. I've seen some chat on Facebook recently, Homemade Boot, the live album from that period, which is long out of print. We could bring that in, so we could get a double LP, we could get a 3 CD set with the original album, outtakes and demos, and the live set. So there's a nice package there that we're hoping in due course, when Chuck is ready, it's gonna be out there. And
he's ready for the Duke Ellington box set.
Yeah. I think New West are interested maybe in putting out No Other Love and Age of Miracles on vinyl. Is that right, Chuck? Are we allowed to say these things?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Get some pre-sales going.
So yeah, and I know I'm one of these vinyl fans. So and I'd love to have some of these albums on vinyl. And you know, Chuck's perfectionist instinct, I think it'll be done right, and you know, and that's probably part of the reason why it's taking longer than some fans might like. I think Chuck is really, you know, keen to make sure everything is mastered properly, that the vinyl's done right, that the, you know, the whole package is you know, is giving the fans what they deserve and what the music deserves. So if it takes a little bit longer, I'm going to hang in there and be patient and wait for it to be done right.
Stevie, what's something you're particularly excited about in the archives?
Well, I mentioned Heartbreaks Like the Dawn. There's a fantastic version of that is done as a duet between Chuck and Steffi, so they're swapping verses. And I think I've been through around 450 tracks now, that goes from about 88 to 99. And out of those 450, there are the two crown jewels for me are that duet version of Heartbreaks and an outtake from Homemade Blood called Do Do Do, Trying to Get Away From It All, which I can't believe it didn't make it onto the album. But having said that, everything on that album, you know, I wouldn't want to lose anything either, and it's already 50 minutes, so something had to go. But I'm really excited about a song like that getting out for everybody to hear. So it's not just me dancing around the kitchen to it, then everybody can enjoy it.
Cool. Chuck, I just got an interesting question. So it was a pleasant surprise for a lot of us to hear Strings in the Temple when you released that during the pandemic. There's a question here from Brian. He says Temple Beautiful was one of the many high points in your career, in his opinion. Any news about a theatrical presentation of that record?
Well, mounting a musical, as it turns out, takes some real doing. So we had it up on its feet a while back, and we kind of had to hit the big pause button. But you know, we're ready to mount it again if and when, you know, we can get some funding. Really, I wish more people could have seen the stage reading of it because it was incredible. Our producer did an incredible job, and Clay Davis was his name, and there's a website for it. You can see some clips of it. We asked that Little Mike, who's here in the chat, we said, please, Little Mike, can you not bring your cameras to this event? We'd rather you didn't. We're happy to invite you. And so iPhone or something, and he was able to capture a lot of it. And then later we asked him if he had any footage, and he said, well, I just so happen to have some. But he claimed he was going to bring a courtroom sketch artist. And I didn't. So there is a website, and you can see some of Little Mike's footage, and it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, Little Mike made a comment too about
Beautiful and musical, I believe.
There you go. I dropped it right there in the chat. Yeah, this is funny. I feel like I'm eavesdropping on a lot of inside jokes here in the chatter between Little Mike and Help Me K-Dog.
These are the kind of animals I attract.
Somebody asked about a stolen notebook in Winchester. Chuck, do you know what that's all about?
Southampton.
Yeah, 1 year in Southampton, somebody took my notebook off the stage, and yeah, we couldn't get it back. We looked at some of the, you know, in England, there's CCTV everywhere. I mean, yeah. If you're going to the bathroom and you know, there's bound to be like and that's how they deal with, you know,
yeah.
They don't carry guns. I like it. So, yeah, so we looked at the footage. We thought we saw some guy with something like under his jacket, you know, and And eventually we did offer a reward, and somebody did return the book. So I'm happy to say that there's a happy ending there. And I hope it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if anyone has questions, now would be a good time to drop them in the question thing. Well, you know, I texted you about this, Chuck. There's not an easy way to ask the question, but you know, any thoughts on Justin Townes Earl and just in general what this time is doing to, you know, people's mental health, all of us?
I just don't have any wisdom to share with that. I mean, I think that it's too soon to comment on his death. I don't know the details. And
yeah,
you know, it's not a great life, you know, in that respect, you know. I mean, neither is being a waitress, you know. It's a dangerous job, actually. I mean, just on a practical level, just being in vans all the time, you know, up against weather, a lot of drinking, a lot of drugging, and so yeah, it's just sad to lose anybody. I mean, he was Steve's son, and he was a father to his kid, and a husband to his wife. So I don't really have anything to share about that, you know.
Yeah. Stevie, did you want to comment on? Is there anything? I mean, let me phrase the question a little differently, Stevie. Given sort of what's happened in the last 6 months, and the way that the industry is going to change as well, not just the, you know, live music is going to be different, and if there was an additional chapter in a re-release of the book, how would you talk about this period?
Well, let me just say first of all about Justin Townes Earl. I will just say I read something on Facebook, or it was a Facebook link to an article about his death, and I was, some of it was very moving and was really paying tribute to his great music, but there was talking a little bit about the fact he was named after Townes Van Zandt and he's Steve Earle's son, and there was just a slight sense of, you know, this was his destiny, and I just felt there was a slight romanticization of it, which I thought was unhelpful. And, you know, as Chuck said, you know, we don't know the details, but everybody knows that he struggled with addiction. And I think there is a danger with romanticizing addiction, which I think is really unhelpful. And I think, you know, addiction is a disease. And I think some of the commentary about it I've found upsetting to read in that respect. In terms of, you know, what the music industry now and what everybody is dealing with, I just feel like I couldn't write that chapter now because we don't know how this and when and where this is going to end. So it just seems such a limbo period. In my own working life, I'm about to go back into teaching, and mostly teaching online, so I'm not going to be in rooms with students. So it's affecting all of us in different ways, of course. But clearly, you know, people who make their living, increasingly working musicians, making their living via touring, because we all know what the effect streaming music has had on that side of the business. It's unimaginably hard, and I just think not knowing where your future is going and how long this is going to go on, I just find that really difficult to contemplate what it must be like experiencing that. And I've probably got a clearer sense of what it must be like having spent the time I spent with Chuck over the past few years. And yeah, all we can do is hope for some kind of normality before too long.
Well, I will say this, you know, Daniel, I know that you worked in the music business and you were the house manager, at the Swedish American and the Du Nord. I know a lot of people who do sound, booking agents, bartenders, bar backs, doormen, and I hope we can find a solution that works for everybody. I think musicians tend to get out in front of these things because, let's face it, musicians are more savvy at social media. So, I'm hoping that there's, we can find something that will help everybody. Because so many of these mom and pop businesses and clubs that I play around the country, they don't have any corporate money to back them up. They're not Starbucks, and when all these plywood comes off these businesses in my neighborhood here in the Castro in San Francisco, I just pray that there'll be businesses there and won't just be a Starbucks on every corner, So that's my fear down the line. My fear isn't that I got to sit around a little bit and get a Criterion box set or two and try to learn some more James Burton licks on the guitar. I'm going to be all right today. I'm going to be all right tomorrow, even the next day. But the big picture, the big ecosystem that works for everybody is really what concerns me.
Yeah. Are you seeing that? Is that coming back in the UK, Stevie?
Not very much at all yet. They've done a few gigs outside with people on like little platforms in their bubbles, but it just looks weird to me. I can't imagine having fun at a gig like that. It's and we seem to be a long way at the moment from anything like the kind of venues that I like to see bands playing 100, 200 people. If you think about when they talk about distancing in venues with that kind of capacity, you're talking about getting 40 or 50 people in, and of course it's just not economically viable. So it's really hard at the moment. My local the railway in Winchester, where Chuck's played many times, I co-host an open mic there, or used to, every Monday, and we do it online now. But they're talking about maybe trying to get that started again, with just maybe 20 of us in the room, invited in. So there are just little glimmers of hope, I would say. There's the Music Venues Trust, I think it's called, which has done really great work in advocating for particularly small venues in the UK. So we've got a bit more money than I think the Tory government had wanted to give, just because of the pressure that was put on them. So I'm not in despair, but I think we've got quite a long way still to go. That's my feeling. And
to your point, we can express our desire to keep this culture alive, and get the powers that be to fund it. It's very much, I think, in our power to do that, to demand that. Definitely, yeah. We've got just a couple minutes left, so let's see. I think we got to all the questions. There was an interesting question that Stevie answered, but Chuck, if you could only suggest 2 songs to someone new to your music, what might you choose right at this moment?
You can't trust the artist, man. We're so biased.
Yeah.
I love my.
What about off the record? What about off the new record?
I would just jump into it. Start at the beginning of side 1, and if you get to the end of side 1, and you're digging what you're hearing, turn it over. It's pretty simple.
Nice.
I think there's something for everybody on this record, and I think it is a record that knows what time it is. And I think that's more important than ever. There's 3 presidential songs on it. One of them is about Lincoln. The other one is about my childhood hero, Richard Nixon. And the other one is a little more contemporary. And like I tell
then you
people,
also make reference. You make reference to you being president on a 4th song.
Yeah, I guess so. Is that High as Johnny Thunders?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably worth saying, can I just jump in? One of the things about the album, of course, is is the songwriting collaboration with Kurt Lipschutz, and it's been a long and the book chronicles quite a troubled path at times, with Chuck and Kurt working together. Chuck, have you got any reflections just on working on this album specifically with Kurt?
I don't know. We got a break, you know. I mean, you kind of need to get lucky above everything. We got a break. I mean, we've sort of gotten hot before. I think we got real hot when we wrote Temple Beautiful. But we got a break this time around. And I should really credit Stephanie as well. I mean, I've thought a lot about this record. And one of the things is that, just to simplify, at one point I did play some songs for Stephanie, and she said, you know, are you going to continue? Are you going to continue to make these rock pile records, or are you thinking about doing something different? So I think some of the more acoustic part of the record is something that is kind of fresh and a place that I haven't been before, or I haven't been there in a long time. And so that made it kind of exciting. And when we tracked, I sang my vocals live and played acoustic. So that made it kind of exciting. And I was really in the moment for that. And I don't know, it's just a lot about this record that I feel like is, I don't know, just a high watermark, you know.
Dan, I want to thank everybody for attending. And Dan, if you could come back on the line, I want to ask you, the chat has just been priceless. Will we get to have a copy of the chat? Please say yes. Maybe they'll play the Nixon song at the Republican convention tonight. Yeah, that would be nice. Or get off the stage, even better. And thanks for that, Rain. That was a nice comment. Thank you for that. James Prado for president. I'm all for it. Dan Graham, Book Soup.
Yes.
Are you still out there?
I am. Yeah. Let me come up. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you for this. This is great. Just want to remind everybody that you can purchase What Makes the Monkey Dance. Purchase it directly dead center of your screen. Purchase supports Book Soup, supports Chuck, and supports Stevie. And I want to say thank you to Daniel for moderating with us tonight. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for staying up late, Stevie.
My pleasure.
When this broadcast ends, it will live in the archive. So you can, about a minute after it closes, you'll be able to tell your friends about it and share it with friends. It's in our archive. Thank you all for being here.
Cool.
Thank you.